Imagine having the opportunity and privilege to see a king's unclothed body. Again, imagine having the honor to directly pee in front of the Queen as part of French manners. Let's dive into the grandeur and luxury of the Palace of Versailles, the opulent seat of French royalty that became the epitome of the glamorous life of a king. But behind the dazzling facade lay a world of bizarre etiquette and strict regulations. Versailles' etiquette was as complicated and ornate as the furniture and artwork filling the great chambers of the French royal palace. They are not easy to digest. The smallest details of life at court, including personal hygiene, were dictated, regulated, and policed. Even the seating arrangements were based on rank, with kings and queens lounging in armchairs, while duchesses perched on stools. And as for the bathroom habits of Princess d'Accord, who believed her blood was too pure to use a chamber pot? But more often than not, court etiquette at Versailles was more bizarre than it was dignified at the time. Welcome to History Rediscovered. So join us as we peel back the layers of the Palace of Versailles and discuss weird royal French manners that are just unbelievable. The Palace of Versailles had fairly humble beginnings. Louis XIII, 1601 to 1643, bought the land because he loved hunting and built a chateau as a lodge where he loved staying at night if he had no time to go back to Paris or Saint-Germain-en-Laye before dark. Louis eventually expanded the chateau and bought more land, which led the way for Louis XIV to turn Versailles into a palace during the 1660s and 1670s. He even moved the French government and its court there in 1682. At one point, over 5,000 people could be accommodated in Versailles' large living space. Louis transformed the structure into an opulent palatial symbol of French monarchy. The so-called Sun King, King Louis XIV, ruled by cultivating and managing a royal cult around himself. Hundreds of thousands of plants and trees have been continually planted over the years. While this makes the gardens look amazing, in the 17th century, the fragrance from these blooms in Trianon was so overpowering, it made guests feel ill and drove them away. With its exceptional gardens, impressive hallways, and larger-than-life artwork, Louis and subsequent French kings used Versailles, which wasn't quite as glamorous as it may seem in retrospect, to display their authority. From the Sun King to Marie Antoinette, Versailles was the center of the royal world, and remained so until the French Revolution changed everything. Full-body baths were rare. People would only wash their hands and face to get clean. When baths were taken, they were prepared for the entire family. Family members bathed in the same water and had a strict order to follow. First, the father would bathe, and then the mother, and then the order would trickle down from the oldest son to the youngest. It's rumored that even Louis XIV followed these rules and only bathed when advised to by a doctor. The king typically cleaned himself with a cloth and either water, saliva, or alcohol. The courtiers of Versailles, particularly during the reign of Louis XIV, had various methods to maintain personal hygiene despite the limited bathing practices of the time. Sponge baths. Instead of full baths, many courtiers opted for sponge baths using a linen cloth soaked in water. This allowed them to clean their bodies without the need for a large tub of water. Use of fragrances. Courtiers often used perfumes and scented powders to mask body odors. These were made from various natural ingredients, including flowers and herbs, and were an essential part of their grooming routines. Frequent changes of clothing helped maintain a semblance of cleanliness. Courtiers would often wear multiple layers, and changing undergarments was common to avoid the buildup of sweat and odors. Hair was an important aspect of personal grooming. Courtiers would powder their hair and use wigs, which could be managed separately, allowing them to maintain a clean appearance. While full baths were rare due to the belief that they could be unhealthy, some did take baths occasionally, especially when traveling. When they did, they often used scented oils and herbs to enhance the experience. Cultural norms. The cultural norms of the time placed great emphasis on appearance and the use of fragrances, which helped mitigate the lack of regular bathing. Overall, while full baths were not common, the courtiers of Versailles employed a combination of methods to stay as clean and presentable as possible. One of the greatest privileges was to see the king's naked body. Virtually every aspect of royal life at Versailles was highly orchestrated, ritualized, and displayed. That included royal wake-up calls and bedtime. The lever and the coucher were 2 times when nobles received the privilege of getting to attend the king or queen as they woke up or went to bed, respectively. The privilege to do things like hand the king his shirt, meanwhile, went to the highest-ranking gentleman in the room. Whomever got to help the king change into his clothes for the day even got a glimpse of the royal body in all its naked glory. As bizarre as it sounds, yes, it was considered the very height of French society to be allowed into His or Her Majesty's toilette. While we would consider it very odd if we asked a friend to dispose of our bath or toilette water, or worse. To the French court, it meant that those who were considered socially superior would be allowed into that most inner sanctum. Since being at court was about 2 things, kissing the royal bottom and climbing the social ladder to shake the king's money tree. So access to the inner chambers of the royal court would be a feather in a well-connected cap. Also, the Sun King's personal hygiene is a matter of debate among historians. On the one extreme is the rumor that Louis took only 3 baths in his life. It is quite clear how the rumor started. People in 17th century Europe were told that bathing opened the body's pores to disease. Bathing was considered to be a terrible health hazard. Instead, people doused themselves with perfume to mask the inevitable stench. Where and if courtiers got to sit was a matter of rank. It was a truth universally acknowledged at Versailles that only important people got to sit down in the presence of royalty. Naturally, the king got an armchair, as did his queen and any other visiting monarchs of appropriate rank. But courtiers were granted the privilege of sitting down based on their rank. Princes and princesses of the royal bloodline were entitled to armless chairs, while duchesses could sit on stools. Like many of the rituals at Versailles, the politics of seating arrangements could be highly contentious, and many schemed to gain the right to sit on a stool in the same room as the king. In one instance, the infamous Princess d'Harcourt raised eyebrows when she forcibly removed a duchess from her stool after finding no other seating to her taste. In general, however, courtiers only got to sit at the mass, at the comedy, and at the card table. Of all things, courtiers were pretty lax about where and when they could answer nature's call. For all the strict rules and protocols that governed court life at Versailles, it is downright bizarre that folks at the palace were not bothered by when or where courtiers decided to relieve themselves. In his memoirs about life at Versailles, Louis de Rouvroy, Duc de Saint-Simon, recalled that the Princess d'Harcourt routinely relieved herself in the hallway, much to the anger and annoyance of the servants who had to clean up after her. The dignity of her blood, in her opinion, was so great that it would actually be beneath her to stop and use a close stool. So she would just answer nature's call as she went along, hardly bothering to stop walking. Even for more conscientious courtiers, the lack of plumbing at the storied palace meant human waste was basically everywhere. In other words, Versailles was a stinking palace, and visitors often noted how horrible it smelled. Courtiers grew out, a fingernail to scratch on doors, as knocking was a major faux pas. At Versailles, something as basic as knocking on a door was highly regulated and ritualized. It was considered rude, especially when knocking on the door of the king. Tapping on a door with knuckles was a faux pas. Instead, courtiers had to scratch on door frames with their fingernails. This more discreet system was the only way someone could announce their presence to a room. As a result of this method, courtiers grew out one of their fingernails specifically to scratch on doors. Toxic French court hair and makeup. The fashion for courtiers in France during the years leading up to the Revolution was excess. The more the better. Higher hair, redder lips and whiter skin could all be achieved through hair and makeup artistry. Let's have a closer look at how beauty was defined in the 18th century. Every courtier wore makeup in the 18th century in France. In fact, you were considered rude or common if you didn't wear any. Today, we consider makeup to be more of a woman's product, but in France, during the 18th century, both men and women enhanced their features with makeup. Pale skin was considered beautiful. It meant you spent little time outdoors in the sun, unlike those common farmers and peasants. To make themselves as pale as possible, both men and women would paint their faces with lead-based makeup. Of course, we now know that lead is poisonous. There was a very high incidence of lead poisoning in the court of Versailles. Lead poisoning can be fatal, something which was actually well known during this time. Many people quite willingly continued to use lead makeup until the 1770s, when the fashion started to die out. By the time Marie Antoinette moved to France in 1770, only the older courtiers were still using the white face paint, and this was probably only to cover the scars and spots the makeup had caused in the first place. Interestingly, the effects of lead poisoning on the skin lead to other fashion trends to hide pocks and marks. Red heels were the most coveted shoes at the court. Originally, high heels were made for men and was especially popular at the court of Louis XIV, who himself adored the style. But women also started wearing them. He actually had a special type of high heels named after him, the Louis heel, which concave on the heel itself to create an elegant curve. In true Louis fashion, he decreed that only certain nobles could don rouge-heeled shoes similar to his. The king made it clear to his court that he was to have the highest heels, and no one could wear any as much as a millimeter taller than his. It was only the king himself and those who were in high standing with him who were allowed to wear red heels. One of the reasons for why red was so special was that it was very expensive to color something that perfect red tone. Thus, red heels became a symbol of prestige long before Christian Louboutin ever started designing his own. One thing that remained constant through Louis XIV and Louis XV's reigns was the dominating large buckles on men's shoes. These were either silver or gold and could be very intricately decorated. It was very common to use gemstones, both genuine and look-alikes, to decorate the buckles further. Court dresses were so heavy that women practiced moving in them, so they didn't topple over. Being presented to the king and queen at Versailles was one's official entrance into the royal court. As all things at Versailles, being presented was a major ordeal, and new courtiers were expected to dress the part. Full court dress was highly regulated. Women had to wear heavy, long skirts over waists that were shaped by painful, unforgiving whalebone corsets. So inconvenient was court dress that women actually had to practice moving in the ensemble. During the all-important presentation ceremony, a woman would have to curtsy several times while approaching the royal personage, which was cumbersome enough. But what really required practice was doing the same in reverse. It was highly offensive to turn your back on royalty, so it was necessary to back out of the room, all the while making sure not to trip over the long train of your dress. This could be a make-or-break moment for many women new to the court. The expense of keeping up with fashion at Versailles was a financial burden for most courtiers and was yet another way the king could regulate nobles through performance. Versailles was full of double doors, but they didn't open all the way for just anyone. Rank and position at Versailles shaped nearly every aspect of a courtier's life. That was even true of what doors ushers opened. Though the sprawling palace boasted plenty of double doors, Ushers opened only one of the two doors for the majority of courtiers. The practice was a reminder of one's place, as the only people who had the honor of having both doors open were the king and his close family. Women's fashion cost many lives. The iconic silhouette of the time was that of the rectangular dress, accentuating the smallness of the waist and largeness of the hips. Not many women had this figure naturally, especially not once the hips were padded out to 6 feet in width. The width of panniers could range from modest to extreme, depending on the occasion, with the largest of skirts saved for formal occasions. It was very much a case of the larger the skirt, the wealthier the woman, so ladies would wear the largest, most elaborate skirts that they could afford to balls or to the royal court. You might think it's very strange to wear tight corsets and large hooped skirts every day. How could a woman get anything done if she couldn't bend at the waist or fit through a doorway? Well, in truth, many women did not. An 18th century woman's world, if she was wealthy, was all about being beautiful, graceful, and desirable. Her role in life was to make a good marriage and run the household. Sadly, this meant that she did very little besides sit doing domestic tasks, such as sewing or reading, taking walks or visiting friends. Wearing these elaborate gowns with everything going on underneath was not such a hindrance to her lifestyle. Servants, on the other hand, varied in the width of their panniers. A lady's maid, working for the royal family, for example, might wear a small pannier skirt under her maid's uniform, though a kitchen maid would have no need of one. Poorer women did not have such elaborate dresses. Their corsets were of lesser quality and therefore not as rigid. Without the huge panniers to get about in, their clothes did very little to hinder their movements. Thanks for watching. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe.